Hey, great. Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me here, and thanks everybody for attending. Um, Today we're going to talk about essentially how Agile coaches can have constructive collaboration with leadership. Um, and I first kind of got onto this topic because in a lot of Agile circles, it seems like we like to blame leaders, and leaders just don't understand, right? And I think that that's problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one, leaders aren't always the problem. Number two, that kind of lets us off easy in terms of as agilists or change agents or whatever. We have a lot more agency than we think in this. And then number three, if we want to have the biggest impact and lasting change on the organization, then we really need to work with leadership. So that's why I wanted to kind of talk about this topic tonight. Just real quickly about me. Um, I'm an organizational change and product development consultant. A lot of that is doing agile coaching type things, right? But also, I also focus on the organizational level as well as everything involved in product from discovery to delivery and things like that. Um, Previous to getting into helping others as a consultant, I was a product development leader, both for engineering and product at several software product companies, mostly around the Philadelphia area, which gives me a unique perspective in that I can tell you what leaders think because I was one of them for a while. And and so just a different perspective on things. And I did all, even when I wasn't an agile coach or an agile consultant, was trying to promote agile skills, agile mindset, different ways of working, high performance culture, things like that. And then the only other important thing for you to know about me is I'm a huge sports fan, and that's why I have all the Philadelphia teams down there, and Michigan's my alma mater. So just like that's what I'm doing when I'm not talking about organizational change or agile stuff. So what do we want to do today? So number one, I hope to help you have some empathy for what organizational leaders go through and how they think and things like that so that you can better work with them. Number two, I want to share with you some things to avoid doing, right, that make it hard to have that partnership with leadership. Then, of course, we'll learn what to do, right, that makes it more likely that we'll build up credibility and have success working with organizational leaders. And then once we have that credibility, we want to talk about ways to use that credibility to drive the change in the organization that you're trying to accomplish, right? So first, let's talk about why you need leadership as an ally in order to really create enduring change. So this is right. This is us as an agile coach, as a change agent, right? And we're pushing that rock, which is the organization. We're trying to push it up the change mountain, right? And it's not easy to do. And sometimes it seems like, just like with Sisyphus, right? We get the rock up to a certain place and then it comes falling back down on us and we have to push it up again, right? And so let's talk about why organizational change is hard, right? So essentially, you're getting exactly what your system, your organization, the policies, and the people in it are perfectly designed to do. You're getting that result. Now, of course, you want a different result, right? You're trying to implement change, right? And so what that means is that essentially you need to change the system or parts of the system in order to get a different outcome. And right, changing the system is hard, and we're going to see why it's hard, right? So these are some things that get in the way of change. So we can have incentives that incentivize the wrong behaviors or incentivize one group of people to work one way and another group of people to totally opposite way, right? Which makes it hard. I mean, essentially, all these things we're going to talk about are things that will try and resist change and kind of snap the organization back to working as it always had, right? We have our set of policies, which govern certain things that are acceptable or not acceptable. We have, resistance to change where people, not that it's necessarily their fault, but there are many reasons why there's resistance to change. People don't understand why we need to change, right? They may not know how to change, right? They may think that even if we do this, it's not going to result in a better outcome, all sorts of things, right? There's the leadership. How does the leadership behave? What are the things that they value? I don't know how many times I've been working with teams or people in an organization and I'm trying to get them to change something, but oh no, well, that's how Bob wants us to do it. If Bob's the bigwig or Mary or whoever, right? There's always that, oh, well, no, our leaders won't let us do it that way. So that further constrains new behaviors. The org structure might be causing dependencies that drive delays and make it hard to work together. Everybody's existing behaviors are kind of self-reinforcing, right? And people don't like it when we're changing the existing behaviors, and of course that leads to peer pressure. That's not how we do things here, right? So when you think about these things, right, and this is just a partial list, but some of these things are kind of very decentralized, but some of these things are very specific to one group of people, right? And that's leadership, right? The policies, the incentives, how leaders behave and how they promote values, the org structure, those are all directly controlled by leadership, right? So they're the ones that have the most influence over the change blockers. So basically, there's going to be a very low ceiling on what we're going to be able to accomplish in terms of organizational change if you don't have leadership support. So if you want to really have a positive and enduring impact on the organization, you need leadership support, right? So since we need leadership support, let's talk about how to go do that, right? And the first thing to know is to know your audience, right? So what is it about organizational leaders that we should know that is going to help us to better work with them? So everybody, I think almost everybody's familiar with the Wizard of Oz, right? And we have Dorothy and the Tin Man and Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion, right? Maybe one of the world's earliest Scrum teams, I'm not sure, but they're the heroes of this story, right? And they would be able to go see the Wizard of Oz if not for the villain standing in the way, which is the Wicked Witch of the West, right? So it's pretty clear the Wicked Witch of the West is the problem, right? And us Agilists here, Dorothy and gang, are not the problem, right? But it turns out that just like in other things, there are a couple different sides and different perspectives to the story, right? So we found out when Wicked came out that, well, wait, the Wicked Witch of the West is actually, she was a nice person, as she had a name, Elphaba, right? We didn't know all this, right? So this is a metaphor for organizational leaders, right? Organizational leaders are people as well, right? And they're trying to do the right things, and they have responsibilities and things like that that cause them to act in the way that they do, right? And so I think it's important for us to understand that. So just like in any good UX effort, we want to understand our audience and kind of create a persona. So I went ahead and tried to create a persona for an organizational leader, right? And so some of the notable things about them is they're often responsible for hundreds or thousands of people, right? And making sure that they get a paycheck every week or every couple of weeks or whatever it is. And that's a big responsibility, right? And number two, depending on how high they are in the organization, they're reporting to other very senior leaders or even the CEO and the board of directors. And that's something that I've done. And that's very scary, right? I mean, that's like the higher up you get, everything is very binary and you're expected to have answers and to be able to commit to different things. And that's right. That's important to understand when you're dealing with them. And they have a lot of financial responsibility, whether it's to drive revenue, to drive profitability, to control costs, things like that. And they have a lot of challenges too, which may not be evident right away, but they're way far away from the actual action of how things work in their organization. And so they really don't have a lot of good information, like from their own observations. And then number two, people tend to either be scared of them or do not, they always want to look their best in front of them. So people tend not to deliver bad news to them, which means that their intelligence, the information they have about their company, right, is very not accurate. And so that's a challenge for them too. And then they're held accountable for work they're not doing, right? And like, I think most of us can relate to, I'd much rather be responsible for work that I'm doing because I have full control over that. But it's something different to be responsible for what other people are doing. And like, remember that when, like, if somebody starts to micromanage a little bit, that may be why they're doing it. They want to have a little bit of control in the outcome. I know none of us have enough time in our days and looking at our calendars, but if you look at leaders' calendars, it's an easy day for them when they're not triple booked for most time slots, which is a big challenge because they don't have time to think or reflect. It's also tough for you if you're trying to work with them because you can't get in to see them. But some of the things that they really like, they like predictability because they're making commitments to the board or to the CEO or some other senior leader. And so the more that they know what sort of work their group will be able to deliver, the better. Like I said, they have very bad information, so they really like the truth and transparency and being able to see what's actually going on instead of what they're being told is going on. They're kind of risk averse, because they get in trouble when bad things happen. So having an early warning detection system so that there's more time to be able to adjust and adapt. They like that. We've talked about profitability and growth, and they're responsible for that. And then because they don't have a lot of time, they don't like it when people babble like on and on, before they get to their point. And so usually when the more senior person you're talking to, they like to get the answer first. Tell me what I need to know, and then I can decide whether or not we want to go into the background or the history or how you came to that decision. Things that are very comforting to them, metrics, because although we know the dangers of metrics, like at least they're hard numbers, right? And so they can take some comfort in that. Delivery actually means they have the end product, right? So there's no uncertainty in that. Okay, we delivered this, right? I can see it. And then because they're quote unquote smart people, right? And they've had a lot of success in their life to get into the positions they are, they like to provide input into things, right? And because they're held responsible for results, they're also they like risk management because it helps reduce the risk that they're gonna be responsible for something failing. Okay, so just some basic observations on that. A lot of responsibility on their shoulders. things like new ways of working, continuous improvement, culture of adaptation, etc. They're a means to an end. They're not the end itself. So they're less, they do care about the means, but they care much more about the end. Like they don't have time to worry about the means. Like that's why they hire the rest of us, right? And but if you're talking to them, you don't want to get too tied up in the means. It's very lonely being leaders. Number one, the higher up you get, the fewer peers you have. And then the higher up you get, the more competitive it gets. And I've been in situations where I've had a few people I could at least talk to at that level. And I've been in situations where I think everybody, if I turned my back, everybody was ready to go, stab me in the back or whatever. It's not a lot of fun. It's good to be able to make decisions and have that power to make decisions, but it's very lonely. Um, Leaders answer to other people just like we all do. They have their own challenges, which we just talked about. Um, they don't have a lot of time, and because they don't have a lot of time, and because you don't get too many initial chances to be in front of them and interact with them, first impressions are really crucial. And leaders are very binary in the sense that they make up their mind in the first 10 seconds or first minute or first interaction that they have with you. And then it's very hard to move them off of that. And they either view you as somebody who's going to help them achieve their outcomes, or you're somebody who's not going to help them, right? And you obviously want to be in that first category. So having said that, right, there's two other challenges with leaders I just want to quickly review with you. So one is this concept of arrivism, and this was in a recent Substack article by Gustavo Rossetti. And I can share these slides later, and you can click on the links or whatever. But basically, as humans, we tend to believe we are correct. I think it's like a survival mechanism. And sometimes even when the evidence says we shouldn't be. But it gets even worse when you're in positions of power because you've seen success. You think the success was due to your ability and smartness, right, and things like that. So that's a problem dealing with senior leaders, is that they're a little bit harder to get them to change the way that they're doing certain things. The other thing is it seemed like executives today and for a long time have like been really focused on trying to obtain certainty. And that's why we tend to come up with an annual plan and then we kind of stick to it, right? This is the plan. This is how we're going to achieve the goal. And yet we know that we live in a world where things are changing more often. It's getting more complex with competitors in the marketplace, customers changing, and all sorts of things, right? And so what we really need to develop in leaders is how to find clarity to really understand the situation as it is, not as we hope it is, right? And that goes with transparency and things like that. And this is something that I saw Bob Johansson talk about, and I think he also talks about in this book, Full Spectrum Thinking. But to me, this is the hardest part about dealing with leaders, is there's this ingrained thing of certainty and following plans, and yet we know that there's a lot we actually are uncertain about, and the more we admit that, the more adaptive we can be, right? And the more we can find the right solutions. I mean, just as an example, with products and features that we put into products, about 80% of the features we put into products are never or rarely used by our customers, by users. And that's a really bad percentage, right? But if we acted like that was the case, then maybe we wouldn't have these big upfront plans, right? And just mindlessly follow them. And we would do more testing and more strive to get more early feedback and things like that. So having said that, So we have to bring something to the table as Agile coaches, right? So what do we have to offer these organizational leaders? So there are a few things. And right now, I'm assuming there's not, I'm assuming there's not any sort of, like technical knowledge or product knowledge, or this is just general Agile coaching powers that I think we have. So we understand about feedback and having fast feedback cycles and adapting, right? That's a lot of what we do is built upon that, right? And Scrum is built upon that, and a lot of Agile principles are built upon that. And that's a valuable skill in the world that we live in, right? Number two, part of our job is always to observe how people work together, right? And help facilitate with them and help them learn different ways of working, encourage cross-functional working, things like that. That's something that people inside the organization, a lot of times they don't have time to look at and things like that. So that can be really helpful, especially for a leader. And then like in chess, right? The knight is the piece that moves unlike anybody else, right? Because it moves kind of in two directions at once. Um, it moves two up and then one over or whatever. And like Agile coaches are sort of like that in that we can move across functional silos, we can move across organizational levels. And it depends. If you're an internal coach, you may have limited ability to do that. If you're an external coach, you certainly should have the ability, depending on who brought you into the organization, to go across different levels. And that's important because communication between different levels often gets garbled, and right, leaders' messages never get down to the people in the front lines, and what the front line is thinking never gets up to the senior executives. And that's something that we can bring to the table and help out with. So I think many of you are familiar with the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. And so just to just kind of level set for today, like most of what we're talking about is on the left-hand side of the growth wheel, things related to transforming an organizational change, leading and helping senior executives lead. We're going to talk about some of that stuff, and advising. That doesn't mean that all the rest of the stuff isn't important too. It is, and you'll use some of that stuff. But in terms of what comes to the forefront when you're working with leaders, organizational leaders, especially on organizational change, it's that left side. And as if the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel wasn't enough, I actually added in the X-Wing model, the classical version from Lisa Atkins. And the reason I did that is because the first time I gave an earlier version of this talk was at Agile DC, and it was a live conference. And I found out the night before that I was going right after the keynote speaker in the main auditorium. And the keynote speaker was Lisa Atkins. And I'm like, I can't have a presentation right after her and not have her X-Wing model in there. So that's why this is in here. But again, it's the transformation mastery if you like this model a little bit better. Okay. So now we know a lot about leaders, right? So how do we speak to these leaders in a language where, number one, they will understand, number two, we will be heard, right? So, right, we need to use language that, number one, they understand, but number two, that shows that we're not some bureaucrat trying to, slow things up with some newfangled way of working. Our interests are the same as theirs, right? So what are the things that they're interested in, right? So things like sales growth and customer retention, sometimes employee engagement, predictability, right? These are all things we talked about: competitive advantage, risk management. Am I being an effective steward of the resources that the board and the CEO have so graciously given me, right? Metrics, are we delivering things? Are we delivering things we said? These are the things that on average leaders care the most about. What are some things the leaders don't care about? So they don't care about the Scrum Guide. They don't care about story points. They don't care about self-empowered teams. That doesn't mean that some of the stuff isn't good stuff. It just means that leaders, you will go either right over their head or they'll run the other way out of boredom or like just whatever. Um, Powerful questions, agile manifest. These things are important to us and not important to them, right? I mean, I think the closest thing is maybe user stories. I've had one or two CEOs who sort of know what those are, sort of. And so sometimes they'll ask about that, but in general, they don't really care about this stuff, right? So we don't really want to focus on this stuff when we're talking to them. So let's start off with the negative. What not to say? And some of these things, when I show them to you, you might be like, I can't believe somebody actually said that. But I've actually been around when people have said that. I've even had some of these things said to me. And actually, it might be okay to say it to me because I understand some of this stuff. But anyway, these are things you do not want to say with your limited opportunities with senior leaders. According to the Scrum Guide, never start a sentence like that, right? As you can see on this burn down chart, another thing you really don't want to, right? And plus we all know that burn down charts aren't all they were cracked up to be anyway, right? But now we're going to get to the next level of arrogant. Like this is just kind of like, yeah, that's the wrong thing to say. These next couple are kind of like really arrogant things to say. So we need to adopt an agile mindset. With everything you know about leaders, you probably don't want to tell them we need to, and then adopt an agile mindset, right? Mindset's kind of I mean, it's a real thing, but it's kind of soft and squishy, and it's not really related to what leaders really care about. And plus, like 5 agile coaches what an agile mindset is, and you get like 10 answers, right? But whatever you do, don't ever say this. You just don't get it, right? Yeah. And I've heard people say that, and it's like, all right. So what are some more effective things to say? So, for example, we could say, here's the customer feedback we've received. And so why is that? Like, why would that be perceived better? Because they care about customers, number one, right? And so if customers saying it, immediately it has more importance. Number two, we're being a little bit scientific about how we're working, right? And kind of reducing risk in a way. So that's why they will be interested if you start out your sentence that way. Likewise, our hypothesis is that customers will, whatever, they'll be stickier if we add this feature, right? Or they will be willing to pay more if we give them the ability to do this, right? Again, it's hypothesis, we're experimenting, but we're doing it in a very targeted way, and we're doing it to drive outcomes with customers, right? Leaders can understand that. Leaders kind of like that. It seems like you have a strategy here, right? So they like that stuff. This next one's going to be a mouthful, but I think it's still okay. So if you're trying to explain like why the teams are working the way that they are and why you're not just executing this big plan, you could say something like, we're working on delivering in smaller chunks more frequently so we can reduce risk, learn faster, and adapt to customer behavior, right? There's lots of good things in here. So we're reducing risk, learning's always a good thing, right? And adapting to customers, right? Those are all good things. Those are things that they can understand. They may not understand, that like, when am I, like a lot of times, right, executives want to know, when am I going to get the whole thing? Like, we need this whole thing to be successful. But this is a way to tell them, this is a better way of doing things because we're going to listen to customers, we're going to reduce risk, right? Things like that. So that's a way to sort of speak our language, but also to speak their language. Okay. So I wanted to do a little bit of practice. And so basically, we can give you a scenario. And then what I'd like people to think about is what do you think leadership is thinking when they ask this question, right? And then how would you respond to this? So let's say you're in a meeting with leadership, right? Some level of leadership, and they're looking at the original plan and they're like, okay, so why did our teams deviate from this plan? Does anybody want to take a stab at like what they think, why leadership's asking that question? What are they thinking about? What are they afraid of?
In their mind, something's gone wrong because they wouldn't be asking if things were going smooth. So there must be something bad that's gotten their attention. You missed the numbers, or they had an unhappy customer or something. So this sounds like a sort of a question to put people on the defensive. Like, why did this go wrong? And it may not have actually been wrong, but that they perceived it as wrong.
Right, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to add, if they would probably be thinking about the repercussions on customer, how that affects.
right. Yes, we may have made commitments to customers, based off of what the original plan was, although that's not a very good practice. And I say that both as a agile coach and as a leader, as a product leader, not a good thing to do, but we all do it, right? And yeah, like if we had the plan and now we're not delivering on the plan, that must be a problem, right? So that's what they're thinking. So how could we articulate why the team deviated from the plan in a way that will make them feel better about their concerns?
So Gary, can I throw a quick thought here? You mentioned a moment ago that a lot of folks don't always share all of their information with their leadership, and they don't even realize that they're doing this, right? Like folks out of fear don't always provide transparent updates, and communication is a real challenge at that level. When I see this question happen a lot, what I always see is like deviations happen, but they were necessary. However, nobody actually communicated it when it came up, right? Like, hey, we started a project with 5 business units. We actually needed to pull 8 business units in. Somebody raised that challenge. We told them to go away because they couldn't push the deadline out instead of raising the challenge, getting the support we need. Now we're in a bad situation where we need to push by 6 months, right? And everybody's like, hey, what the heck happened? I see that all the time because folks don't want to talk and they don't want to be transparent about those sorts of hot button issues. When like, hey, we actually need to reevaluate, we need to actually communicate. I don't know if that's the direction you're trying to head with this question, but I just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, no. So certainly I actually have a whole different talk that I do on like why program status or project status meetings are the most useless thing in the world because of that exact thing. People don't want to give bad news, right? And people are so defensive. It's like an inquisition, right? All that stuff. And then what happens if that goes on long enough, you wind up with really bad situations and the guys are like, what the hell happened? Everything was green and good. And right. So yes, 100%. I think for this particular, like scenario, we could even assume though that it's like a sprint review, right? Or something similar, like a monthly. So we haven't even gone 3 months or 6 months, but it's like, hey, the team adapted, right? They learned something and either they didn't communicate it at the time or the executive was too busy or whatever. But yes. So the executive thinks something bad has happened because we're now deviating from the plan. So how do we make them feel better about that?
Can I take a stab at it, Gary?
Sure, go ahead.
So I wanted to I'm trying to make these connections. I want to say them out loud. So it's like, as part of the persona, the leader wants or craves predictability, safety, which is, I think it's strange because Agile is all about navigating chaos and the unknown, and like it's a scientific method. And as a leader, you would think they would be more comfortable with that, but instead they want, the blanket And so I'm thinking, and it's funny, I've been in those positions too, but I get it. It costs money, and people's jobs. But I would think maybe start with the bottom line. Like we deviated, like you said, get to the point up front and just say either it's words, and I don't know, I'm taking a stab, but like we found the better method. We had to words that are not triggering, be cautious of that and really start with the benefit of the change. Like if we didn't make this change, it would have been a worse outcome. That's what I'm thinking.
Right. We would not have the whole reason we undertook this project or this feature or whatever, right, was to achieve this outcome. And we realized after a couple of weeks worth of work or whatever that we weren't going to achieve that outcome, by following the original plan. So we've adapted, right? And when you start saying things like that, right, then they're like, okay, now I actually might feel better about this, right? Because number one, you guys understand the outcome we're trying to, achieve, right? And number two, we've learned something and we're more likely to achieve it. And like one of the things that leaders do, unfortunately, they're asked to make commitments early on too, right? And so like whether it's the beginning of the year, beginning of the quarter, or whatever, they sign up with the board, and in every quarter they have to go back to the board and say, hey, I know we said we were going to do this, and this is where we're at. And when we do the whole traditional thing about sticking to a plan, we're really relying on a lot of faith that that was the right plan, right? And we all know as Agilists that oftentimes that's the first plan we come up with is not the one that's going to get us there. So I think as a leader, I would feel much better if you could tell me, look, here's the outcome, here's how we're measuring our ability to get to this outcome. Here are like 3 different ways we've thought of that we can possibly do it. We started out on this. We found out that this thing that needed to be true wasn't going to be true. So now we're, now we're moving on to, kind of, we're adapting to make it more likely that we'll actually be able to achieve the outcome. And like, for those of you who know Teresa Torres and opportunity solution trees and things like that, that's sort of the magic behind what she talks about. But like having had to go in front of boards every quarter, like if I go into a normal program status meeting, I feel like I'm not getting real information, right? And so I got to rely on faith. But if I hear people actually show me, this is what we were thinking, this is what we tested, and this is what we learned, and therefore we made this decision, I can decide whether or not that was a good decision or not. But at least like now I know and I see that they have a plan and that I can trust where we're at. And also when you have conversations about that, unlike why are you behind on the plan, right? Which is very accusatory and people get defensive, right? This is more of a, what did you learn, right? What did we learn, right? And what decisions, are we making based off of what we learned? Like, that's a much more collaborative discussion, right? And executives like to be able to put in their 2 cents worth. There's plenty for them to talk about there.
So what about starting an update with like, we got lucky? And like, what do you mean? This is what we found, and then you deliver the bad news. Is that I mean, I haven't tried that before, but I think it just sounds like fun, like doing the icebreaker with we got lucky, and then this is what we found.
Yeah, well, as long as they don't have anything big and heavy, by them that they might throw at you when you say we got lucky. No, yeah, no, I mean, I think like there's a lot to you're an adult, right? I'm going to get, and you don't have a lot of time. I'm going to give you the headline first, right? And then if you want to know kind of, this is why it's a good thing, right? So we decided what we were doing was not going to get us where we needed to go. So this is what we learned. This is why we made this decision. And this is where we're headed now, right? So yeah, get it out there. You know, you can be the best judge of how much sense of humor your executive has, as to whether, you know, how funny you make it or not. But
That's what I was thinking. It's like a modern day court gesture. You know,
yeah,
you
read the room. Yes, exactly.
So
Okay.
question about these strategies.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sasha, to connect to a conversation we were having with Joel a moment ago, when it comes to actually implementing some of these strategies, where I find they fall apart is you give the update, especially in hierarchical organizations with a lot of middle management staff or emerging middle management staff. You give the update to the middle manager and it gets absorbed. And then the senior leader is like, what the hell happened, guys? Right. And is surprised, blindsided because mid management has a bit of a control complex of over filtering information. What are your thoughts there, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, the more layers you have in the organization, the tougher it is, especially if you have to send messages up and down, right? And information gets lost all along the way. The one thought I had, and I mean, maybe this won't work in a really large organization, but if you do have something synonymous, you know, with like a sprint review or something like that, you know, with the whole product team, not just with one Scrum team. If you can get, if you can make them attractive enough for more senior people to show up at them, then you eliminate that problem. I know it's not always easy, and at first they probably won't show up, but another thing I'm a big believer in is having actual customers at sprint reviews. And once you start having actual customers there and they start hearing positive feedback from that, they're going to be more likely to want to show up, even just out of curiosity, and say, hey, what's going on here? This is something different. And you know, I got a call or an email from a customer, and how happy they were that they were at this sprint review and this and that, and that, you know, and so they go to check it out. So that's the one thing I can think of. I guess, you know, the other thing, it depends on, are you internal or external to the organization, and who brought you into the organization, right? So if you have connections to, let's say, the senior executives, they brought you in and you understand what they're trying to accomplish, then it's less of a problem, right? You know, because you have that communication with them. It may still be a problem of the on the way up or down, right? That messaging. And but I think when people know that you kind of have that connection with senior leadership, the middle leadership is more willing to at least hear you out, even if they are skeptical of you or whatever, right? They you know, they know that they have to at least give you, you know, give you a somewhat open mind.
Another comment I would add is if you find you're in that situation where you're meeting with the big boss and you have the sense that those middle managers have not been totally transparent with the big boss up till then, try not to embarrass them in front of the big boss or throw them under their bus, because that's adversarial. That's not going to help you in the long run. You kind of have to have them somehow give them a chance to save face and be part of it, this presentation, because otherwise it's just going to be awkward for everybody. And
yeah, and you definitely have to be judicious about when you're questioning somebody or fighting against norms or things like that. You may need to plant seeds first, right? Things like that. And certainly when you're doing something that is, you know, may not be perceived as positive, you definitely want to, you know, do that privately as much as possible first. So yes, all those great best practices apply. Okay. I actually have a few other scenarios. I don't know that we'll go through them, but I'll just at least throw them out there so you kind of see different things. Like, you observe that leadership requires sign off on many decisions on your team, right? And your team's waiting around for these decisions, and they only have the approval meetings every other week or every month or whatever, right? that's another situation where, okay, why do leaders have these sort of policies, right? What are they trying to protect against, or why do they think that's the best way to work? And then how would you respond to that, assuming that you would rather the team not have to wait around for weeks to get approval? So we don't have to go through this one, but I'm throwing it out there for something for you to think about. This is kind of just more of the same as you're in a meeting, leadership's looking at historical, God forbid, velocity numbers or things like that, right? And like, hey, why are the teams delivering less than they did 6 months ago or whatever? And I think we all know why they're thinking what they're thinking, right? And then the question is like, how do you respond to that? This one's a little bit more interesting in that, let's say leadership is just kind of bemoaning the fact that we don't have enough innovation, right? And how can let's brainstorm, like, how can we get more innovation? What do you think they're thinking?
Quicker turnarounds, more
Maybe.
efficiency, money, or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, like innovation is maybe they mean new features, maybe they mean, something that's going to, differentiate our product from our competitor's product.
So actual innovation, not like double speak. I know you put.
Yeah, I did put it in
Yeah.
quotes. That's my
Yeah.
fault, but
I mean,
yes.
maybe they got some data that says, we're losing market share, or the competition's got some, has kind of won some deals because they had features that we didn't have, or some, there's been some kind of bad news like that. And they figure maybe the problem is we don't do enough innovation, or maybe they heard someone say that.
Yep. All good thoughts there.
Mhm.
So given that, how do you think you'd respond to something like this?
Would it depend on the type of business? Like, I mean, obviously, but if it's like service versus product versus, like, if it's a construction, what is innovation? Like different processes and different products and services?
That's what I
Um,
was thinking, because innovation is such a broad term, and it means different things to different people in different industries. So how I would approach this is to drill more towards what they think, what they're referring to the innovation part of it. Are we building a radical new application that will, shake the markets or things like that? Or is it innovation in terms of how we approach things, our thinking and all that stuff? So I think how I would approach it would be, drill into it and see, in a very non-challenging way, get them to speak more of what they think of this innovation that they're talking about.
Okay, so let's just, for the purposes of argument here, let's just say that, we're, our product's just the same as our competitors, right? We never come up with anything new. We're just matching what they do. Like what would be something you think is causing that to happen, that needs to change, that you would want to talk to them to bring to their attention?
So I think no matter what industry you're in, you want to be at the front of that industry, which means you want to be working on the emerging technologies and the new ideas in that space. And when you're talking to your leadership about new strategic initiatives, I think what they're going to want to see is not only how you're going to bring in, agility based, speed to market focused strategies to increase revenue profits into the business, but also what your strategy is for customer retention. So once you have people, you've got them and they don't churn out of your business, and you generate actual sustainable additional revenue into the business.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and there are a whole bunch of product related, strategies we could, and best practices we could do, and how do we find out what customers will actually want, right? And things like that. And how do we experiment and iterate and set targets that tell us whether to invest more or to pivot, right? And things like that. But like a lot of places, they have, like, if you take a look at their roadmap, there are no empty spaces in it, right? It's chock full with what they're going to do for the next 12 months. And then if you look at the individual team or individual person level, right, they're all booked at 100%, right? And everybody is measured on, did you do what you said you were going to do? How efficient were you, right? Did you hit your goals of delivering, X or Y? There's no room for innovation when you have that happening, right? And so, right, we want to think about some sort of a way to kind of nicely,
Hey, Gary,
talk about
it-
that.
just a quick comment. I've seen companies where um, you're right, they do the tactical part of it in terms of execution regarding the product plan or what they need to deliver per quarter or what have you. But they also, as best practice, in order to get their engineers excited about new technology, they allocate a certain amount of hours for the engineers to work on innovative projects, meaning technologies that are out there that would, so maybe in the future they can incorporate into their product roadmap. So this is happening, concurrently. You're developing your product, but at the same time, you're keeping your eyes open, your ears open for new technologies, and they dedicate engineering time to set up a test environment to build those things.
So couple comments. So thank you for that. And yes, that's true. Although the company that's most famous for that, Google, I did some work with them, and they now call it, instead of 20% time, they call it 120% time, because
Right.
you get your 20% after you do your regular job. But beyond, so like if people are doing that, then that's good. Although I would say I want more cross-functional. I don't just want engineers playing around with technology, because right, you have to understand customers and customer problems and jobs to be done and things. But the point well taken. But I want to pull us back, because the what we're focusing on today is not necessarily the solutions. It's what are we going to say to leaders to help them, like they're trying to achieve an outcome, and yet the whole system is conspiring against that innovation, right? How do we say it in a way that they will understand that and give it consideration? But I'm gonna move on. So, and when I'll get these slides to everybody, but here are a couple of ChatGPT so you can try at home, because one of the things that generative AI is great at is you can practice with it as much as you want, right? And I'm not saying that you always get the best answers, but just by practicing, right, you're going to get better and feel more confident about how you articulate certain things. And I've actually done at least this prompt before. Like I've actually done a session. I can, if you contact me afterwards, like I can actually probably send you my transcript and you can see what I said. Not that I always do it right either, but like simply, tell ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, that you're the CTO, we're going to do some role playing. And in this case, the scenario I gave it was, they want to know what I think about the CTO's plan to add 10 more teams to work on a product so we can get features done more quickly. And then just some instructions so that it understands that it's only, that I'm the agile coach. You're only providing the statements from the CTO. Wait for my response after each thing. And you can actually practice, and then you can redo it. try different strategies and kind of see what happens. Now realize your CTO may be different than ChatGPT or whatever, but and then if you really want to challenge, you can add some additional language, like telling it that you're very cranky because it's almost 1 p.m. and you haven't eaten lunch yet. And you can also tell it, if you want to get good about not mentioning agile stuff, tell it that you're very sensitive to any mention about agile mindsets, sprints, or specific agile methodologies. Anyway, so these are things that you can do and at home and practice as much as you want. So now that we kind of know like how to be heard and how to get an audience with leaders, the next thing we need to do is we need to generate credibility and trust. And we almost always, when we're working with teams, right, and we look at organizations, we talk about psychological safety as being the foundation for everything else, for transparency, for feedback, for learning, adapting, experimenting. And if you don't have psychological safety, no need to bother with the rest of it. So when we're working with leadership, trust is kind of that equivalent of psychological safety. They need to be able to trust us and know that we're aligned with them, right? And so what are some things that we can do to build trust other than speaking their language and kind of speaking about things that they're interested in. So if we can work with the team and helping the team to deliver software every sprint, they like delivery, right? And hey, you're making things better, right? And you know how to get things done, or you know how to help other people get things done. That's really good. If you can help them with transparency, right? Like, hey, you can look in here. We now update this. There's visibility to the stuff that's getting done, so you don't have to wonder. And even if they never look at it, the fact that it's there for them, I think builds credibility. We talked about like sprint reviews and, when you invite customers in and they see that, right, that's something where they're like, wow, this is like real, whatever you guys are doing. And like, that's a big positive. If you can improve metrics and team performance, especially early on, that gives you a lot of credibility. If you can develop internal champions, like people who are respected within the organization, maybe they're senior engineers, maybe they're, leads, maybe they're UX person, whatever, a product person, even like a customer support person, right? Who's got, who knows a lot about customers. They're like, customers love what these guys are doing here, right? And they love being involved, right? As you start to develop these internal champions, right? People notice that and leaders notice that, and you get a lot of credibility for that. A lot more credibility, right? They trust their internal folks sometimes, especially if they're well respected internally. That can make all the difference in your credibility. When we're in the office more, you could actually walk by in the hallway and hear the excitement of people collaborating. When you had customers in, a little tougher if people are working remote, but sometimes leaders will pick up on that. And we know leaders love metrics, so make sure you baseline where you're at, make sure you have a good understanding of what outcomes leadership is hoping to, get. And then as you show improvement in that, you get a lot of credibility from that. So now, quick little family feud that we're not going to play against each other, but we have top six answers on the board. Apparently points are tripled this round, but how do we, in all seriousness, how do we know that we're gaining the trust of leadership? What do people think?
More responsibility.
It's a great one. Yeah. What else?
Increased autonomy.
Increased autonomy. Great. Yep.
More support.
More support. Sure.
They seek out guidance, or I guess they run ideas, springboarding, brainstorming, valuing ideas and feedback.
Yep, I think you got a lot of the ones I come up with. I mean, the simple answer is they actually don't run the other way when they see you in the hallway because they don't want to have anything to do with you. And I actually had a thing where when I was actually working for Google as a consultant, I was mostly remote, but I came in one week to run a workshop. And the first day, of course, I had a badge, but the badge didn't work. And so I'm kind of sneaking in and out of doors. I mean, I wasn't in anywhere I shouldn't been, but like, I couldn't get in the doors because my badge didn't work yet. And so I was like, kind of trying to get through this doorway, the specific way where I wouldn't have to badge back in. And this person was coming in through the door, and they held the door open for me, and then they're like, Gary. And then I'm looking up and I'm like, wait, this guy looks vaguely familiar. And it turned out, so I was brought in by like a director, and this was like who this director reported to, who was responsible for the whole site, like had thousands of people on his direct line. And that's who it was. And the fact, I knew I was either doing a really good job or a really bad job. I'd only like presented in front of this guy once or twice, but he knew who I was, right? And he spent time talking to me. And so that's a very high level heuristic to say, okay, you're doing okay. But I think you guys hit a lot of it. You get more responsibility, right? You're invited to work with new teams. Leaders, you start showing up at things, asking questions. You're asked to share stories like at town halls and things like that. You're pulled in, people ask for your advice and things like that. So those are all ways that you're gaining the trust of leadership, right? And so we've worked really hard to leverage the credibility that we have with leadership. And so now what do we do with that? Right? How do we leverage that credibility? So there's a lot of things we can work with them on. Remember, they control a lot of levers, right? So if the incentives are incentivizing people not to change, right? How do we change that? Like maybe go to team-based incentives and things like that. Leaders have a big soapbox, so helping them communicate, having them tell the stories of new ways of behaving and actually having them behave that way, right? That's really powerful. We gave the example of like having a lot of approval gates and processes and things like that. Like, can we convince leaders to instead just say, this is the outcome we want. Here are some guardrails, go crazy, right? You have autonomy to go, do things within those guardrails to try and achieve those outcomes. Budget cycles, right? Changing it to work more with agile teams or product teams, redoing the way that team structures work, maybe have more cross-functional teams, more value stream aligned teams, things like that. This healthy recognition of what we don't know, right, is encouraging conversations that weren't happening before, right? To admit that we don't know or we're uncertain or we're learning, right? We're learning, we tried this, we learned this, now we're doing this, right? Those sort of conversations. It's very hard to have those conversations happen unless you have leadership support for that. And then this last one, I'm going to talk about making space for others, is when you've gotten to this point where you have the trust of leadership, whether you're internal or external, you now have some privilege, right? You have privilege that other people in the organization don't, right? You have some capital and, right? And you need to use this privilege to give space for the people on the teams and the groups that you work with to start being more autonomous, to start implementing new practices, to experiment with different things. And if you really do have the trust of leadership, you can say, I know that, that so-and-so is going to be okay with this. Or, if something goes wrong, I'll take the blame for it. Right? These are things you can do when you have trust, right? And you have that connection with leadership. And right, so part of it is going top down, but part of it is also getting the people on the front lines to change their behaviors and things like that. And it happens a lot faster when you give them the permission to be able to do that. And you can't do that unless you have the trust of leadership. So. All right, so this is basically it. So 3 things I'd like you to remember from the conversation today is you need to talk leadership's language so that they understand you and they hear you. And then once you know how to talk in their language, right, you now have the ability to build credibility with leadership, so that they understand that you're competent and that you're in alignment with what the outcomes they're trying to get done, right? And once you do that, once you have that, become that trusted partner, then you can make a lot of really great things happen that are the things that you need to have real long-lasting, enduring change in the organization. So, and then this is just different ways you can get in touch with me if you want to go deeper on that. I mean, I'll stick around for any questions you have now, but in that first QR code, it's just if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. The second one is I have a free newsletter on LinkedIn if you want to subscribe to that. That's what the second QR code is. Excuse me. I blog a lot too, and you can check out my blogs there on Practical Agility website. But anyway, thank you for having me. Hopefully this was meaningful, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to go try and answer them.
Great presentation, Gary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. It's a phenomenal presentation.